Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 241. This program is in honor of Yossi Samuels upon his 50th birthday on the 16th of Teves, wishing him all the brachas, dedicated by his friends and classmates. 50th birthday is a unique birthday. It says Ben Chamishim Le'etza in Pirkei Avos. And just to mention 2 points, since we're talking about a 50th birthday, of course I extend my blessings and prayers as well for Hashnas Hatzlocha. When the Rebbe turned 50, which was in Tovshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe said the Maimed and Yud Aleph Nissen, Adonai Sfosai Tiftach. It's on the Kapitel Nun Aleph, which we begin saying when we turn 50. When Rab Nissen Nemenov, the big Mashpia, turned 50, the Rebbe told him to chazer that Maimed, Adonai Sfosai Tiftach. That's one short point. Another, I saw a note that the Rebbe wrote to someone who was turning 50 to look in Shari Zeyar on Ovis Seif Perek Hey. Shari Zeyar is a sefer from Rabbi Reuven Margolius where he cross-references Zeyar and Shas, a sefer that the Rebbe used extensively, referred to, because it connects Shas and Zeyar and different opinions. It's a very interesting piece on Chamishim there, Chamishim Shona, Ben Chamishim Le'etza, different opinions of different Chazal on 50. So happy birthday to you, and definitely look up these both, the Maimed Adonai Sfosei Tiftach, as well as the Shari Zeir on Chamishim Shana. This is a good opportunity as well that anybody interested in sponsoring, dedicating a program in honor of a loved one or memory of a loved one, Le'aleinu, this is an excellent opportunity to do so. I should also say that for those that are not aware, we have an entire section on our website, meaningfullife.com/mylife, where you have all My Life Chassidus Applied resources, beginning with archives of all the previous episodes, which are all indexed and can all be accessed by looking at the timestamp in the YouTube version of the videos. You can actually just go straight to the topic. You can search by topic, as well as the essays from previous years, and as well as a forum where you can submit any question anonymously and confidentially, and that's where most of the questions come to us. So we begin with that housekeeping. I will also, even though I always begin with the time, and we will talk about the time this week and the Teves as well as Parshas Shemos, but because we are getting close to the official launch of the 5th annual My Life Chassidus Applied contest, so I'll let you in on a little secret for those that are listening in. The official announcement will not be until next week, as we get closer to Teves, which is our anniversary when we began My Life, as well as the essay contest the first year, which was after the first anniversary of the My Life Chassidus Applied series. So you can begin preparing your essays. I'll just give you a few little tidbits. We'll announce it more officially. This doesn't have to be kept a secret, but since you're listening, you can begin, and why not have extra time, an extra week? So the essay contest will be officially launched then, but that doesn't mean you can't prepare and start writing and researching. It will be the $10,000 first prize, the second $3,600 prize, the third $1,000 prize, and then there will also be an extra, as we did last year, a special $500 prize for students, only for students. Students could also win the other prizes, but the last final prize will be only for students. The deadline will be Zayin Oder Rishon, Tovshin Tes, which corresponds to the English date of February 12th. And you can already go to meaningfullife.com/contest and see the rules and the details. Those familiar with the contest know about it, but it's always worthwhile reading the rules again and the guidelines. And as I said, you can begin. Even though the official opening will be next week. I will say that the essay contest has had unbelievable impact, far beyond our expectations. I mean, some things I've heard from people literally that have changed their lives. I know it sometimes sounds like a cliche, but people have told me personally how it's changed their lives in detail. And I'm extremely moved and touched by the fact that someone's harving and exerting themselves to invest in writing a Chassidic essay, even though not everybody can win the first prize or the second prize, third prize, but that alone is the biggest winner of all. I've also mentioned that the first year we launched that contest, we actually discovered afterwards, Bashgocha Protis, Divine Providence, that the Rebbe wrote a letter 60 years to the day when we first conceived of the contest in Tovshin Tes Vov in Teves. I believe Yutes Teves was when the Rebbe writes a letter about writing essays, the Kovid Yud Tzfat. To quote one of the essay top 10 winners in the previous years, Chani Maleki wrote about reviewing of the brain, not the same before and after, how it really rewiring of the brain, I should say, how it really rewired his brain. So that's the ultimate compliment and the ultimate objective, to take Chassidus, apply it to contemporary life, to take a situation, an issue, a challenge, and bring Chassidus and make it come alive in addressing that particular issue. I keep mentioning, I'll say it again, the essay contest is specifically geared for you, for everyone. It's a level playing field. The biggest understanding, the people who understand Chassidus best, who have submitted, are not necessarily will be the winners, because there are other necessities to win a contest, which is also, would win an essay, have a winning essay, which is also applying it. And we specifically made it in a way that anybody can win. If you look at the winners of the last 4 years, you'll see that they were not necessarily name recognition people. You don't have to be an excellent writer. We don't judge it by writing, and we don't judge it by pure knowledge of Chassidus. It's a combination of a bunch of factors as outlined in the rules. I say it because there are people who keep mentioning, it's not for me. How could I compete with all the great ones? How could I compete with others? You can. Don't underestimate. And you could win $10,000. So I don't see why one person wouldn't put the effort. For really, all it is a little time and energy. You don't have to put any investment. It's not like you're putting in money, which you could lose. You're putting in some time, and the reward on all levels is absolutely inestimable. I also would emphasize that don't wait till the end of the contest. Now is the time. Don't push it off. Start now. Give yourself time. Make sure you review it. Make sure you show it to someone to review. Make sure you follow all the guidelines, because many essays would be marked a lot higher if they just filled in a few details that the guidelines and rules require. Because again, to have a level playing field, you need to have rules that everybody has to abide by. That's what makes it equal. And please, above all, share it with others any way possible. Get the word out there. It's one of the most obvious ways of giving the Rabbeim nachas for all the investment and all their mesiras nefesh in teaching Chassidus, in writing Chassidus, in giving us their time over all the years, all the 7 generations, and especially our Rebbe. What better way to honor that is by actually doing something, by taking a inyan Chassidus, and it could be about any topic, it could be about Geula Mashiach, and using it as a tool, as an instrument that helps us all become better people, better Jews, better Chassidim. Okay, now let us go to the time. This week will be Chav Teves, later in the week, and it's also Parshas Shemos. So these are 2 themes that the Rebbe would talk about, especially in later years with the Rambam, after the Takon and Tovshim Mendel, after Pesach, 1984, when the Rebbe came out with the suggestion, or you can say the Takone, which is like the edict, or to begin learning Rambam either 3 chapters a day, finish it once a year, or over 3 years by learning 1 chapter a day, or Sefer HaMitzvahs, Chav Teves, which is the yortzeit of the Rambam. It's also Parshas Shemos, which is the beginning of the 2nd book of Chumash, Sefer HaGeula, as the Ramban Nachmanides calls it, and it is also, which we'll talk about next week, because next week is Chav Dalet Teves, and the Rebbe connects the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe, many similarities, and their yortzeits are within 4 days of each other. But let us focus a bit on the Rambam and focus on Shemos. Now, maybe we'll begin with Shemos and then we'll go to the Rambam. Of course, the obvious question is, the first 2.5 chapters of Sefer Shemos is about Golus Mitzrayim and the bitterness and the depths of Golus. And yet the Ramban calls the whole Sefer HaGeula. So it's true, the whole purpose of Golus Mitzrayim was to bring the redemption, but it begins in the middle of Parsha Boy. And then from there on, the Exodus, the story of Exodus, Beshalach, and then Yisrael Matan Torah, and then the continuing journey to building the Mishkan, with which the book of Shemos ends, with them erecting and establishing the Mishkan on the first day of when the Mishkan was ready to be served in. But then the Parshas Pekudei. So of course the answer is not just that Golus is because in order to bring Geula, when you call the whole Sefer Geula, means Golus is part of Geula. One of the chidushim, one of the ideas that Rebbe emphasizes often, is Yerida Tzerech Aliyah can be determined as Yerida is in order to bring an Aliyah. But then, if you go deeper, the Yerida is part of the Aliyah, because the only way to get to such a great place is to go down in order to go up. So though at the time it's painful and was very painful, and though at the time it was suffering and oppression and all that the exile in Egypt brought, which was literal genocide and all the suffering that the Jews went through, Lo mehiresa lo mazeh, as Moshe says at the end of this chapter, why are you doing evil to these people? Yet, in retrospect, once you see what it led to, which is what Hashem says to Avram Avinu, that yes, they'll be in a land that's not theirs, but then they will leave with great wealth, and great wealth is besides physical wealth, also spiritual wealth. They become a nation, an empire, a nation. Not an empire in the material sense, an empire as the magnitude of a nation. That this nation will now be ready to receive the Torah at Matan Torah and ready to change the world. Being children of Ram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, but it all became formalized after the Kur HaBarzel, like a melting pot, smelting pot of an oven that hardens you, that tests your metal and hardens the metal in order to be able to deal with any challenge. As the Maral says, that before Mitzrayim, after Geula of Mitzrayim, Jews can never be slaves again. Not mentality, not psychologically, not spiritually. Avodei atam v'lo yavodim la'avodim. You're my servants, God's servants, not servants to my servants. So it opened up a new channel of complete transcendence and emancipation of an attitude that we will never bow to another. Mordechai would not bow, and the Jews never bow to anything that's man-made or worship anything that is man-made. So it's an attitude that actually allowed us, as the Jewish people, collectively and individually, to forge and pioneer a new path that would not be just another conformist movement, but one that would actually challenge the status quo, as Avram Avinu did in his time, challenge every form of paganism, every form of self-worship, and bring into the world charity, virtue, tzedakah, mishpat, justice, social justice. And in time, it ultimately changed the entire world. The world in which we live in today, a world that respects freedom and human rights, is a world that was forged by the Jewish people as they left Egypt and introduced into the world the concept of freedom, the concept that nobody has a right to control or subjugate another human being. It took time because it wasn't so simple. Monarchies didn't go away after the exodus from Egypt, but for the Jews it went away. And even though Kata Avded Achashverosh Shanan were still servants of Achashverosh, and we traveled from country to country, and we were under the rule of other countries, but spiritually, in the words of the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he left prison, repeated the words of the Rebbe Rashab, Yi Hashem Elokeinu, Yi Hashem Elokeinu imonu, Mavesenu imonu, and he said that Nishmet unser Ratzon, not with our desire did we go into Golus, not with our desire will we go out of Golus. But we should know that only the guf goes in Golus. The neshama never goes into Golus because the neshama belongs to God. So though we are obligated to follow the rules of the land, din de malchus adina, as long as it does not break the Torah. And there's also a reason. We do it not just to surrender, God forbid, or to succumb, compromise ourselves, because that's the purpose. Birur ha'elam, to be sakin, to repair the world, you have to engage with the world. Alter Rebbe explains in Teres Mishpatim, we speak the language of each nation. Gemara is in Aramaic, Aramish. And we speak the language because we are mevada, we refine the languages, we refine each country that we travel to. So our role there is to, you come to a city, you follow its guidelines, you follow its customs, as long as it's not affecting Torah. And on the contrary, we're there to transform it. And that's what Mitzrayim and Golus Mitzrayim taught us. So the truth is the whole Sefer is a Sefer of Geula. And in our own personal lives, the same is true. At times you may feel subjugated, you may feel obligated, you may feel you have to respond and please somebody's expectations or demands. We have to know we are free people, spiritually free. Each of us born created in the divine image with the ability to achieve anything we set our minds to. Yes, we're human beings, and therefore at times we may feel the need to for security purposes, we feel insecure, others are judging us. But al yevish mepnei maligim, do not be disturbed, don't be embarrassed for those that mock, because you have a unique individuality. At the same time, we have to cooperate with others, we work with others, but never should your voice be silenced, because your voice is necessary, your unique voice. Ein deis, ein shavis. Every person's opinion matters. Obviously, we have a Torah that tells us what to do when we have different opinions. How do we know our opinion is correct or incorrect, subjective, etc.? But it is our birthright and the essence of who we are, that we're created by God in the divine image, and we have that, by virtue of that, tremendous powers and resources. So no matter what golus we go through, whether it's subtle or not so subtle, it's all really part of testing our mettle, of bringing out the best in us, so we can become greater, as the Jews became after Mitzrayim, kashayana esam, ken yirbe v'chen yifritz. As they were oppressed, so in direct proportion to that, they thrived and flourished. Achri Kain, as I said, they left with rechush gadol, with great wealth. That's what we learn from this chapter. The Rambam, Chof Teves is his yahrzeit. The Rambam, of course, the Rebbe, as I said, in 1984, established the idea of learning Rambam every day, because the Rambam in the Sefer Mishnah Torah encompasses all Kol Torah Kula. So when you learn it, you learn every part of Torah. Shulchan Aruch does not cover, for example, Hilchos of the Mashiach, the laws that will only be applicable in time of Mashiach, or when there's a Beis Hamikdash. The Rambam covers the whole spectrum. So the Rebbe, when he talked about it then, he said two things that you learn Kol Torah Kula every year, and you're also Achdus, because when you're learning Kol Torah, which unites Torah, you're also uniting with others that are learning. So it's the unity of Torah, the unity of Eden altogether. The Rambam did that. He joined all different forces. He was a doctor, not by choice, because of the accident that happened to his brother. He was a doctor on one end, he was a philosopher, he was a thinker. He wrote Meir Nevuchim for the perplexed, and he wrote Mishnah Torah for halacha. So the Rambam was an all-encompassing force. It was even controversial in some ways. But that was then vindicated by the Ramban and others to demonstrate his greatness. So the Rambam is a model for us of integration, of bringing together different parts of Torah and addressing different circumstances. So he was such a tremendous leader. He came out in his letter, Yigeres Teman, a letter that he wrote to the Yemenite community, because they were being criticized. They were living under the Muslims. And some of them, the Muslim law was that you had to behave like a Muslim in public, or at least not being Jewish in public. And some Jews ended up going to a mosque. And some rabbis excommunicated them. The Rambam raised this tremendous treatise, tremendous letter of Limut Zchus, that Islam is not Avodah Zarah, it's monotheism, and therefore, of course, that's not the place you want to go to, but it's not considered Avodah Zarah if somebody goes into a mosque. But the main point you see in his letter is how he takes on the cause of those being criticized and understood the challenges of the time and addressed it like a true leader addressed it. So you see in the Rambam many, many similarities to the Alter Rebbe, as the Rebbe says in some of the Sikhs when he talks about the parallels. And of course for us, it comes together in the fact that he united all different parts of Torah, as well as the laws of Mashiach, which he concludes Mishnah Torah about bringing the Geula. And there are many other lessons, so I'll just refer you some cross-referencing to both on Shemos and Chav Teves, episodes 50, 96, 146, and 195. Previous 4 years, we spoke about these topics. Okay. With that, let us go to some questions. Being that we just finished Sefer Bereshis, and we're starting Sefer Shemos, so some questions came in last week about the end of Bereshis, where Vayechi Yaakov, Beretz Mitzrayim Shvas Shana concludes Yaakov's life. So here's a person writes a question, understanding Yaakov Avinu Bechir Sheba Avos. Bechir means the preferred one the ultimate epitome, the chosen of the Avos. Because Yaakov, it says that Avram and Yizchak both had a child. One had Yotzim Mimenu Yishmael, other one Yotzim Mimenu Esav. And Yaakov was mitoshe shlema. He had a family that was complete, all holy people. And Yaakov, of course, also Teves, and many other reasons that Yaakov is called Bechir Shabavas. He brought and he synthesized and integrated the best of Yitzchak and the best of Avram. So here's the question. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I hope you can help me understand Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov, our forefather, who is known as Bechir Shabavas, the chosen one of the Avos, meaning within the Avos itself, the one that's the highest level. His life story is so troubling to me. And the fellow writes, the writer here writes 9 different issues that he wants to address. I'll read them quickly and then try to address them. We start off meeting Yaakov, who won't give his famished brother Esav some soup without forcing him to sell him his birthright. Talk about being judgmental and with a personal gain. Number 2, when it comes to time for blessings from Yitzchak, he doesn't come in honestly and tells his father that he purchased the birthright and the firstborn blessings belong to him. Instead, he has to take them with trickery. 3, this forces him to run away from his brother. He doesn't stand up and defend himself, but chooses to flee. 4, he doesn't defend himself when Levin gives him Leah instead of Rachel. He ends up working for another 7 years. There are so many other responses he could have had other than being Levin's sucker. In the end, the Torah testifies that he stole Levin's heart by leaving without saying goodbye. 5, he comes to Esav and acts weak, sending him presents, bowing and trying to placate him. 6, he blames Shimon and Levi for a deal they made in his presence. Seemingly, he doesn't stand up for Chamer and Shechem. And when his sons do, he reams them out for taking a stand and destroying the city that raped their sister. 7, he plays favoritism and then sends Yosef into harm's way by sending him to look after his brothers, playing into Yosef's very weakness of spreading evil lies about his brothers. 8, when he meets Pharaoh, he bitterly complains about his life, sounding like a grumpkin. 9, after all that, his best years are in Egypt. All of this sounds like someone whose life I wouldn't want to emulate. Can you please help me understand Yaakov? I read this uncensored, even though, frankly, some of it is a little disrespectful. But this is what the person wrote. So, as you know, I try to read it as is. That doesn't necessarily mean I agree with his tone. But I will address it briefly. So, very good questions. Now, I'm not sure why Dafka Yaakov, you picked on Yaakov. If you go through the Torah, I don't think you're going to find one character, one personality, one incident, one episode that isn't controversial. Cain kills his brother Hevel. Look with the children of Noach. Some of them do to Noach. Then you have the story with Lot and his daughters, and you have the story with Esav and Yishmael and Yitzchak. Story with Yaakov and Esav, and them fighting. Some of which you allude to. Yosef is sold by his brothers into slavery. Yehuda and Tamar. The list goes on and on and on and on. I remember a fellow coming to one of my classes many years ago. He had never learned Torah except in his mother's womb. And here he is, starting to learn. And I remember how proud he was as he was finishing each chumash. And finally he comes to the end of Zeh Sabrach, he finishes. He comes to me very disturbed. He says, I thought there'd be a happy ending. After all they went through, you think the last verse, they go into Eretz Yisrael. No. Moshe does not go in. The generation, the Deir Midbar, does not end up in Israel. It's the next generation. And you don't read about that till the next book. He said, what's the story with this Bible, with this Torah of ours? It's not peaceful reading. It's not calming. There's some verses that are beautiful. But it's so much controversy, so much conflict, so much tension. And look at the Jews and God. God does so much for them. They thank him. And then they don't like the water. And when they give him water, they don't like the bread. And they give him the bread, the man, they don't like that. Then they don't like the birds. And on and on and on. I mean, he was a humorous guy, and he described it in such a way that I couldn't stop laughing. And I thought about it. I grew up with it, so I never asked myself this question. So I thought about it, and I came back to him. I said, you know what? The Torah is a reflection of life. The Torah is not meant to be just a book to be read to put children to sleep at night. The Torah reflects life. It's a blueprint for life. And therefore, it's not about happy ending, not happy, it's telling you the realities of life. Realities of life is that life is not simple, it's complex. Now there's an explanation for all these stories. And especially when you know Medaberes Bel Yenim and Meramezes Betachteim, that the Torah is really talking about a spiritual narrative, a blueprint of God's for existence. Long before all these events actually happen, they happen on a spiritual level. And they're happening right now on a cosmic level. However, when you translate, read it in practical terms, it's full of tension and crisis and challenges, and nothing is simple. Nothing. What better reflection of life? If we read a book that was so beautiful and so simple, and everything is so tidy and neat, and no complications and no battles or misunderstandings, you'd say, well, it doesn't fit my life. Doesn't reflect me. You know, it's a nice book, but it's a fantasy. The Torah deals with the realities of life. Now, that's in general. And specifically, now, I'll get all the explanations. You have to learn Torah. You have to learn all the chelkei Torah, all the parts, interpretation, pshat, remez, drus, soid, and especially Chassidus, to really understand its personal relevance. There's so many chapters in the Torah. You could say, what does it negate to me? I'm mitzvah, but there's no mitzvah today. The laws of purity and impurity, almost all of Sefer Vayikra. The Mishkan, the Migdash, the Kriyas Yamsuf. So the answer is it's all directives to our lives. And that's Torah's Meloshen Hira. Torah is not a storybook. It's not a history book. It's not even just a book of inspiration. It's directive, guidance, a guide to life. And that's the whole story. That's why the Torah doesn't mince words. It tells us everything that we need to know to guide us in life. Now, as far as Yaakov goes, Yaakov, Bechir Shabba'avis, he was the closest to the reality because he was the father of all the Shvatim, which become the father, the progenitors, and the ancestors of all Jews. Even though Avram, Yizchak are the first two of us, but Yaakov is the one that branches into the Shvatim, that is direct link to all the of us and so on. So Yaakov reflects most the diversity of life. He lived less than the others. He suffered more. Because Yaakov was a reflection of the challenges of life. Yaakov had a twin brother, Esav. This was not his choice, because as Chassidus explains in Nefesh Halikis, Nefesh Habamis, and when you take all these factors, and I believe I discussed this at length, Yaakov's role of why he had to go to battle with Esav. They represent two nations, two archetypes. And the way you go to battles, you have to dress in the garments of Esav, both in the way that he bought the birthright that you mentioned, and the way that he got the blessings. You come to realize that the soul has to so-called convince the body on its terms, which you may so-call trickery, but it's not trickery, as I discussed a number of times, and I'll give some references shortly, that when you teach a child and you say, here's a candy because you learned Torah, is that a trick? Incentive? No, it's the only way they can understand it is by understanding the sweetness of the candy comes from spiritual sweetness. And I explained then at length the analogy with the Baal Shem Tov about how the king sends off his son to a distant land, and the son is living among others. The only way he can celebrate the king's letters that he receives is through throwing a party and saying to everyone, today's free cocktails, a party. Everybody celebrates because they're getting free food and drinks. And he's celebrating because he received a letter from his father. All this to come to explain that Yaakov's complicated life is actually a reflection of our own journey, every aspect of it, and everything you're describing in such so-called dismissive terms is actually tremendous insight and lessons for each one of us. I can't go and will not go right now through every one of the ones you mentioned. Suffice it to say that every one of them has an explanation, but take this into account. Yaakov is our forefather. He's our grandfather. And his life reflects our life. And there's a Yaakov within each one of us. And challenge yourself, and then look into the Maimorim and the Sichos, how each aspect, each question you ask, this is my homework to you, is actually a reflection of both Yaakov's life of bringing godliness to a hostile world, Vayelech Harana from Be'er Sheva, and in doing so, all the rest will fall into place. So it's actually directives of how we enter a hostile, corrupt world with Levin and Esav and so on, and transform it into a divine home. And every one of all the questions would be answered if you take that attitude. As I said, I'm not going to go through it all because I've done this many times. I'll refer you to episodes 45 and 225 where I did some of these stories. And the rest are all explained in Chassidus in a beautiful way of explaining Yaakov as his role of Teves, Emes, Ishtam Yeshiv Ahalim. How does a pure soul come into a world, a hostile world, a world of Esav and Levin, and make it? And not only make it, but build a family, a strong family, and build the foundations and the seeds that would bring to Ufaratz the Yom of Akedma v'Tzafein of Anegba, which was the purpose. So we're here thousands of years later to talk about it. So if you look at it at a very simplistic, superficial level, yeah, your questions are all legitimate questions. But when you understand the deeper meaning, every one of them has an explanation. As I said, time is simply not allowed to me, because each one of these 9 points you made deserves its own class. So I hope I said enough to get the ball rolling, and of course, I more than welcome any feedback or any further thoughts on this topic. Okay, we go to the next question. How would the Rebbe approach the current issue of government trying to change our education system? Okay, so we have lately New York, the government investigating the system in our yeshiva system, and also other from communities where they don't teach formally secular education. I'm going to get into what incited them and what the causes behind it, but we have a situation. As a matter of fact, I was invited to a session where they came to interview one of the schools, and they wanted to hear a presentation. I was one of those that presented. Basically, what I said that what I believe is what the Rebbe would say. We are here 3,500 years. We brought education to the world. Who is the most educated people? The people of the book. Who brought social justice to the world? Who brought civil rights, the rights of individuals, the concept that the foundations that this country is built upon? It's Jews who studied Torah. So I made the case that exact opposite. You should embrace the yeshiva system, because the yeshiva system is what allows the public school system to exist. And all its foundational principles of morality and ethics come from Torah. Not to say this to pull rank, even though it is pulling rank, is you don't tamper with something that has thousands of years of history behind it. This is not advocating, God forbid, any type of illiteracy. It's the focusing on what is the primary form of education, which is to create better people, to create a better world, to create people who know what their calling is. With that comes as well learning tools and instruments of how to make a living and so on. So what the Rebbe would say, as he has said, that the foundation of the world is based on a Torah education. Everything else follows from there. We live in a secular world, and sometimes does not focus on the spiritual values. And I would even use the word, because we live in a country where there's a separation of church and state, where even the morality, the moral fabric of the belief system and the value system is often also forgotten and lost in the shuffle due to the focus on skills to make a living. All the physical sciences, the social sciences, the political sciences are tools, are instruments. It's having a very sophisticated tool chest, but what are you going to use it for? So the Rebbe's approach would be very straightforward. Chinuch al Taras HaKedesh is the foundation of healthy people, and people who will change the world for the good, and do it in the spirit of Avram, Yizchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Moshe Rabbeinu, and all the greats. And even on a secular level, you see the intelligence and the wisdom of Jews. That wisdom did not come from universities, it came from years and years of academic excellence, of valuing education, going to school from 7 in the morning till 9 o'clock or even later at night, and realizing that education is a full-time thing, not just a few hours in the day. And on and on and on. So the Rebbe's attitude would be very adamant. Obviously, you have to work with the government if they're coming to issues, but to make the case without apologetics is, first of all, an easy case to make, and look at the proof is in the pudding. Does a religious community have its levels of people under poverty level, or people out of jobs and so on? Of course, every community has, but what's our attitude? We have gemachs, we have tzedakos, we help people place jobs. And if you were to make a study comparing the results of yeshiva education, strictly yeshiva, strictly limudei kodesh, with those of their peers, same age, in a public school, come see with the results. What are the results of these adults? Employment-wise, crime-wise, marriage-wise, family-wise, their contribution to society-wise. So the Rebbe's attitude would be very straightforward in this context without even question. Of course, this touches upon the discussions that we've had with this about secular education. So I want to just read the question completely now, since I didn't read. I just read the Hi, Rabbi Jacobson, thanks for all your amazing classes. I would like to know what would be the Rebbe's approach to the issue we have now with the government trying to change our education system. We know how strong the Rebbe was about we should only have Yiddish studies and we shouldn't have secular studies. I've heard a story that one of the administrators of the school asked the Rebbe about such an issue, that the government came to the school to mix in on what we learn, and the Rebbe told him to send them away and tell him that he doesn't have what to do here when he comes again. And he did it, and no inspector came again. Is this something we can still do today? How should we deal with this issue? So I don't know about the Rebbe saying it in that way, send them away and never to come back. Basically, the Rebbe probably said, be cordial and respectful, but also to be firm and tell them what we're doing works and has worked for thousands of years. And there'd be no country of the United States that's only 300 years old, a little less. And with all the foundations built on the principles that I mentioned, if there were no 10 Commandments, and if there were no Torah and the constitutional law based on Talmudic law, and all that comes with that. Okay, in episodes 24 through 26, 153 and 209, I address more the topic of secular studies and how the Rebbe's approach to that. So that covers that question. Next question. Is it appropriate to sing niggunim in the restroom? Hi, Rabbi. Thanks so much for all your classes. They're all very insightful and practical. As a chassid, I'm often singing niggunim throughout the day. They pick up my mood, they help me cope with the stresses of my life, or may simply be stuck in my head. This also includes the time I spend in the shower. I usually hum a niggun to myself while in the shower to pass the time. According to my understanding, this is not a problem according to halacha, since I'm not saying words of Torah in the bathroom. But is it appropriate according to Chassidus, especially since some of the niggunim I sing come from the Rebbeim? To reiterate, it's not like I'm hosting a farbrengen in the restroom and singing the Alter Rebbe's niggun there. It's just a symptom of having a tune stuck in my head and singing it for my own enjoyment. Any guidance would be much appreciated. People ask me whether there's still new questions coming in to my life. Well, here you go. I have to say, and I feel honored and humbled, the mere fact that people feel this is a platform where they can write every question, I think gives it a life of its own, because once you're dealing with personal questions, so even though there are certain basic questions, and I really thought in the beginning we'd cover them after a few weeks, 30 weeks, or whatever it would be, but once people hook in and they bring their personal issues, then really it becomes endless, because life goes on, and life has every week its own challenges, and every day its own challenges. So here's a question, which I can't say is a life and death issue, or something so more psychological, or something so sensitive and personal, but still an interesting question. So let's begin with this. I have not seen anything from the Rebbe or the Rebbeim about this. I'll just share my thoughts and the spirit of things. So thought number one is this. Yes, correct. Halachically, it may not be an issue. But the spirit, when we sing a niggun, we know we bring the spirit of the person who has composed the song or who valued the song. So bring says, just like you wouldn't put a picture, God forbid, of a Rebbe up in a bathroom, in a restroom. Singing a niggun is in some way, it's not the place. Everything has its place. However, thinking about it, I would say this. If you have a very big nisayon, you're in the shower, and you have a machshava zara enters your mind, maybe it's kedai to sing a niggun better than a machshava zara, just to cancel it. But I would not say lechatchila that's the way to go. So I take the question, let's take it a little broader instead of being so technical. There's a spirit of things. Everything has its time and place. Even though Chassidus is so beautiful and so reich, there are places you learn it, there are places you're not supposed to learn it. In the Beitar Kisei, you're not supposed to be mizbein on Torah even. A niggun of Kedusha, is a place, that's not the place for it, it's not the right spirit of it. That's the general answer of it. But I still read the question, I still bring it into the picture. If someone has any thoughts, additional thoughts, by all means. But I will say, commend you to have a niggun on your lips, a niggun that you always sing and hum, is beautiful because it lifts us up, and it lifts us up with something coming from the Rabbeim. We know a Rebbe, just like in his Teves, he invests himself. A niggun captures the Rebbe's neshama as well, especially a niggun from that Rebbe. But again, as I said, everything has its time and place, and that's why I said that you have to have your boundaries. So that's my thoughts on this topic. Okay, next question. Is it proper for a chosid to use a fitbit to track his exercise accomplishments? What is a fitbit? I'll be honest, I didn't know what it was until the question came in. I went to look it up. This is what it's called: activity trackers. Wireless enabled wearable technology devices that measure data such as the number of steps walked, heart rate, quality of sleep, steps climbed, and other personal metrics involved in fitness. Now, I'm not really sure why this would not be appropriate. If exercise is appropriate, why not gauge the exercise? So I'm not going to assume that the questioner meant this, but I'm going to just, instead of assuming, I'd rather broaden the question that perhaps the issue is being obsessed with it to the point where you're measuring, and a person should be obsessed with learning Torah, be Mekayim mitzvahs, davening, shlichus, fotzes amenos chutza. So in that context, yes. To worship the body to the point where you're going obsessed with exercise or obsessed with measuring exercise is somewhat not necessarily in the spirit of what Yiddishkeit is about. At the same time, when person is supposed to be healthy. Healthy is part of medarki avodas Hashem, as the Rebbe cites the Rambam, which means it's part of serving God. First of all, God created the body, so we have to keep a body healthy. It's not yours. It's nechosar shel kodesh baruch hu. It's God's property, as the Radbaz says. Secondly, when you have a healthy body, you can learn Torah b'menucha peacefully. You don't have the distractions of, God forbid, illness, disease, infection, and so on. As that's why the Chachamim nisaveh for Mashiach, because it would be a time where we would have health and we'd have the peace of mind, the peace of the world, to be able to learn Torah without any distractions. Including that, especially if a doctor prescribes it, health is exercise, exercising your body. Obsession is never healthy when it comes to things like this. So if the question is about obsession and the Fitbit just fits into that type of obsession, then I would say yes, just like being obsessed with exercise is not the number one priority in a person's life. It's important. Make it part of your regimen. So once you're doing it, to measure it is also not the end of the world. You're measuring it. This is one of the ways you measure it. But I go again, if it becomes something, this becomes your addiction, all addictions are not healthy. So that's how I would respond to this question. Now, we know, for example, the Greeks worship the body. It's one of the things that the Jews did not do. Now, that doesn't mean we have to go to the other extreme and have weak bodies and frail bodies and feel and feeble and so on. A person has to be a healthy person. So the question is all balance. Okay. Next, God. So we've talked about God many times. This may be an undercurrent of all topics. When you talk about Chassidus applied, you're talking about God, applying God to our lives. So I've talked about this many times, but here is a question that came in, and let me address it, even though, as I said, it's probably covered in previous episodes, and I'll give you a few cross-references after I review this. So God, a few questions about God. And, I know my premise is wrong, so please help. Why does God exist? Where does God come from? How could something always exist? So yes, your premise is wrong, and that's why all these questions are applicable. And so I'm glad you point that out. An axiom, a muskal rishon in Hebrew, is vital. You have to know what our premise is, what our assumptions are. Now, if your assumption, God forbid, is that God is like us, just a bigger entity, so just like a father gave birth to a child, God is the father of all fathers. He gave birth to us all. So then the question applies, who gave birth to him? And obviously it's a good question. But the problem is God is not like us. And loy adamu v'loy kedmus adamu. He's not human, he's not like a human. He created the human being, but God is beyond it all, as Chassidus explains at length, but not just Chassidus, the Chokrim, the Maral, so many different commentaries, that God, based on the verses I just cited and other verses, that God is not like us in any way. So he's not like similar to us. He created us, as Chassidus explains, because God himself manifested himself in a structure and therefore created us in the image of that structure. But God himself is beyond that structure. The famous machlekes between the Rambam and the Rambam, talk about the Rambam Chav Teves and the Maral, cited in Tanya in a number of places, where the Rambam says, Hu hamada, hu yidei, hu yidua, that we and our knowledge of things are separate. There's me, and I know of this chair, I know of this table, I know of you, you know of me. But our knowledge is outside of us. The Eibush says, Hu hamada, hu yidei, yidua, because since he encompasses all reality, he doesn't know something as outside of him, he knows it like from within himself. Comes the Maral, makes a whole tumult. What says? God is defined by das. God is beyond das. Lav inun midas iu klal, as we say in Pasuk. He's not. He doesn't have any attributes, including das. The Maral says God is l'mayel midas. Comes the Arizal, and the Ramak first, and the Arizal, the Alter Rebbe brings the Hagah and Tanya Perek Beis, and then in other places, also later in Tanya Perek Memches, and later in Shayachet Vamuna Perek Tes, and says that the Ramak explains that in Seder Shtalshlus, in Spheris, that's where Hu Amadu Yidei, there's Das. He's skimulate Chachmei Kabbalah with the Rambam. But that's only as God manifests and in attributes, in Spheris. And also the Arizal after the Tzimtzum also would agree with that. But the way God is in his, so-called in his own domain, not defined by the structure which he manifested in, that's higher than all types of structure. And in that, these rules don't apply. So we say, Kosher kekriyas yamsuf. Kosher zivugan kekriyas yamsuf. Making a shidduch is as difficult as kriyas yamsuf. How could it be difficult for God? Kriyas yamsuf is difficult. He created water, he created land. What's the big thing? He could suspend laws of nature like that. Because in the manifestation of Shtalshlus, God said, Lo yishbesu, I'm not going to suspend nature. I'm going to respect the structure I created. And even Kriyas Yamsuf didn't he could have just walked through. No. Sent a wind all night long, caused the water to rise, stand. So as much as possible, it did not suspend all of existence, even though it was an open miracle. But God, as he's beyond it all, he's not bound by these rules. So as such, all these questions on why does God exist, the question is never on God. God is mitzusim atzmus, he exists because he's reality. Reality doesn't need a justification to exist. Not reality, existence like we know it needs a justification. Who says this table needs to be? Doesn't need to be. Someone has to put it here. A tree, there's nothing in existence that has to be. The only thing that has to be, what we call mechuyev hametzias, and that's one of the words, is God. Now, the question you're asking, because you're looking at God as like us, we're not mechuyev hametzias, so why does God exist? God doesn't need a why, he creates the why. Mechuyev hametzias means his existence, as I said, mitzusim atzmus is another term. Existence comes from within himself, not because of a reason. Where does God come from? Who says he has to come from somewhere? Only creations come from somewhere, because they have a source. Mitzusim atzmus, he comes from within himself, which is the reality. It's a different type of reality. How could something always exist? Again, in material existence, even spiritual existence, everything is temporary, everything is mortal. Everything at the end of the day erodes, perishes, and so on. God doesn't have any of that. It says, Ani Hashem leishanisi, nitzchi, eternal. Eternal not only forever, it's because his whole identity, if you can call it that, is of a different nature altogether. Even that word is not good nature. How do we come to understand that? Two ways. God tells us about himself. And number two, you extrapolate through a process of elimination. You come to realize, as Avram came to realize, God can't be another one of us. Because then the same question applies, who put God there? So you have to come to the conclusion that God is of a completely different reality. He's not even defined by anything that we call existence. The ultimate expression would be, definition would be non-definition. Mitzias built the Mitzias Nimtza. And a non-existential existence. It's basically saying you can't say God exists like we exist. You can't say he doesn't exist. So we say he doesn't exist. means he doesn't exist as what we call existence, defined the way we define it. And that's why he's shlilas achiv and shlilas ashlila, meaning you can't say he's this, you can't say he's not this, because that's also our definition, and it's beyond both and all-encompassing. As I've discussed in different episodes, and I'll give you the references, episodes 6, 9 and 10, 83, 104, 105, 107, 151, 181, 202, and 203. And that's not even all of them. There's even more on the topic. Let's now do 2 follow-ups. Okay. Then the Chassidus and the essays. Follow-up. So we talked about empowering women versus role confusion in episodes 239 and 240. And now there's a little more follow-up. I did one last week. I'm doing another 2. I appreciate you taking the time. Last week I read one that felt that I was being too liberal. Actually, that woman wrote back to me and apologized, which I'll read afterwards, the second letter. So she was saying, I think I'm being too compromising, too, what's the word, too liberal. So here this woman takes issue the other way around. I appreciate you taking the time to answer my letter, but with all due respect, you're glossing over the issue. When the Rebbe came out and said that women need to learn Gemara, it is an understatement that he got flack, and not just outside Lubavitch, but the women in Lubavitch balked and the Rebbe had to lower his standards in this regard. I don't even want to continue reading. I don't disagree entirely. The Rebbe had to lower his standards. I've never heard the Rebbe ever lower his standards because someone didn't like something. If he said it, it came from Torah, and he stood by it. It could be you need to explain to people and to give them a way to slowly acclimate themselves to it. But I would not accept that line. That's why I don't want to even give it any credence. Just reading because you wrote it. This is my Machtenista's account because she lived through it. Okay. Well, you can tell her that she's wrong about the Rebbe in any way lowering his standards. Giving women certification to Paskin accomplishes many things. Okay, well, here again, you're not going to find the Rebbe saying learning Gemara and the Rebbe saying that women's schools, which of course other Charedim also do, is a far cry from Paskin Halacha. So I think you have to be careful. The Rebbe never said that he's for women Paskin Halachas for many different reasons. So I just want to make that point clear. So fine, I'll read what you're saying, but I just want to make it clear that it has nothing to do with the Rebbe. First of all, it's not so much about appeasing the women as much as it means to include women as part of the halachic dialogue. Why should a woman who loves halacha and Gemara have to use her God-given talents to go to law school and use her analytical logic in a court of law outside the Jewish community and be in an unsneous environment? So my response to this, she doesn't have to. Women, intelligent women, are consulted by different people, and if they can use their intelligence in an area, they can help a rabbi, whether it's their husband or someone else, that because of their insight, by all means. So these positions give Yiddish role models for girls as opposed to the second best option of the frum woman who is able to maintain her Torah principles in a secular, non-Jewish environment. A woman feels more comfortable using her Taras and Mishpacha questions to a woman over a man, no matter how sensitive the Rav is. That is why the position of a Ye'etzet Halacha, which is like a halachic consultant, was created because too few shilas were being asked and the women were either too lenient or too strict, which created all sorts of problems, including shalom bayis. So before I read on, my response to that is, if it's within the context of both Torah, halacha, Chassidus, and so on, and rabbis endorse it, I see no reason why a woman cannot be a mashpia, especially to other women. And she should be a leader in that direction. Paskin, a pure shaila, black and white halacha, could always consult with the rabbi, but there's so many areas that do need the sensitivity you're describing. And women should take a prominent role in that area. The reason why the ideas of women having these kinds of positions seem so foreign is because we did not listen to the Rebbe's directive to begin learning Gemara when he publicly announced his request in 1990. It wasn't a request. It was saying how times are different, and it wasn't a directive that everyone has to go learn Gemara. Because some people are fitting, some are not fitting. Even men, some are better at learning Gemara, some are not. Again, I'm commenting throughout because I don't want to give the wrong impression here. If Gemara would have been taught in our mezuzah, we would not be grappling with this issue about whether women can be rabbis, because there would have been a seamless transition, and the leaders and the poskim of the community would have put their heads together then to facilitate the next step, which would be a formal leadership position. Again, I disagree. leadership position is very clear how that's done. The Rebbe gave clear directives. It does not have to come as an outgrowth of learning Gemara and to Rabbanim and Poskim. We ought to embrace these options. It improves Yiras Shamayim and Avos Hashem, and increased Torah knowledge transforms women. And if women are transformed, their homes and families follow suit. I agree, but again, we don't have to in any way create unprecedented new approaches. We have a good Torah. Women have always been leaders. I grew up with women leaders around me. I see many women who are leaders. You have to know how to do it and not come up with new approaches. So, though I agree in spirit, and I'm reading it because I know other people may feel like this, but I'm also commenting where I agree and where I disagree. We ought to embrace these options and improve your... Okay, yeah, I read that. Surely you are aware that there's a precedent for all these formal positions, coupled with the statement that the Rebbe said in 1999 that women's minds have strengthened. We could start with post-high school serious learning institutions, in which women are thoroughly versed in all 4 parts of Shulchan Aruch, and will know how to learn Gemara and know major parts of Masechtas which have halachic relevance. If we had women like Rebbe and Rachel who could learn Gemara and Paskin the Shaila before the Alter Rebbe was born, surely today we could have this on a much wider scale, Kol Tuv. So I'm not going to repeat myself. Some points are well taken. I think you have to know your boundaries, what yeah, what not. All this should be reviewed by proper rabbis, not those that are looking to appease or placate, or just because there's new times. That's not the way we work. Women are powerful forces and should be powerful forces. I don't think I have to reiterate that again. Okay. Here was a letter that came to me from the woman that wrote last week that I read. So if you want to know the full picture, you have to listen to last week's program. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you so much for reading my note on episode 240 regarding empowering women versus role confusion. I did go back and listen to the segment on 239 as you suggested. Thank you again for your amazing weekly Farbrengen, and I apologize if in my first letter I was harsh. Listening a second time has changed my perspective on what you were saying. I guess that follows the principle that Noshim Daitem Kalas. No, not necessarily. Noshim Daitem Kalas means women have light minds or light das. I don't see it at all that way, and I don't think you have to insult yourself or insult anyone else. Sometimes we hear something and maybe the tone and so on, so it's important to review, and I'm glad you did. After my second listen, I realized that you indeed were not pushing in any way to empower women in the way the questioner meant, and I think hence my confusion. You were bringing the term empowering women to a traditional place. Correct. According to the questioner and our modern society, empowering women means that women should assume male roles in society. The questioner was giving the example of Rabbi Riskin, who runs an academy in which women can take on the role of rabbi. Your excellent response, namely that women should lead women-focused groups such as Neshei Chabad, clearly demonstrates that the Rebbe's view is that women should take leadership roles for women's groups, something entirely different than the questioner was suggesting. You reiterated the principle of Kol Kfud de Bas Melech Prima, that the honor of a princess is internal. Even the idea that shluchas are partners in directing Chabad houses can, in my understanding of it, should be viewed the same way. Shluchas run programs for women and children. Never was the Rebbe's intention that one week the shliach give the drasha, the speech in shul, the sermon between Shachris and Musaf, and the next week the shluch. I think the topic of empowering women in the Rebbe's view has to be approached in a twofold manner. As a general principle, from what I've learned, the Rebbe's clearly supported women having traditional female roles, raising children and leading family-only groups, female-only groups. And yes, women should be educated to be fully prepared for those roles. However, when it comes to individual women, each one should ask her mashpia what role she should be playing, she should play in helping her husband earn an income and contributing outside the home. The fact that in general the Rebbe's view was as outlined above doesn't mean that an individual woman won't be given other advice from her mashpia. It also seems to differ according to culture and location. In Israel, for example, where dual income is a necessity for most, girls are educated to be able to have careers outside the home, whether in education or otherwise. This approach seems similar to the Rebbe's approach on higher education. In general, he didn't support his Chassidim going on to study in colleges and universities, but individual Chassidim who did get the Rebbe's bracha and support. Since you asked about me, I grew up in the UK to non-observant parents. When I went to university, I studied for my law degree as an undergraduate student, and then studied in Hebrew University for 1 year for a master's degree. During my university years and year in Hebrew U, I became frum and followed that. I got married and had children. After a few years of practicing law at a firm, I was blessed to be able to take a number of my clients and start my own private practice from home. So my path was slightly different from the traditional path of a Chabad girl, especially a girl growing up in Crown Heights would typically be on. I certainly don't want to deny any girl the opportunity to follow her dreams of contributing to society in a way most suited to her skill set and life mission. I just see many girls confused and duped into thinking that they want something that decades later they'll realize they didn't really want. So to sum up, and thank you for that, I read the whole letter, is yes, we're not looking to emulate women emulating men, men not emulating women. They both have divine roles that are indispensable, and we have to know that. Yes, there are changes in society. That's why girls go today and women go to schools. Once upon that was not the case. They have the opportunities to be leaders in a modest and tzniusdik way, especially of women in their community, and many other factors. It's very important to know how to adapt and to embrace the new challenges, the new situations, but never compromise the integrity and the spirit of the original. Okay. There's another question from follow-up, but I'll do that next week. About revealing one's past in shidduchim. We'll go to the Chassidus question and then the essays. Chassidus question. Is God's desire, nisaveh? Nisaveh is a Hebrew word from the Medrash cited in Tanya chapter 36. That nisaveh kodesh baruch hu liyis le'yizbaruch dira betachtenim. The Rebbe Rashab would add the word yizbaruch. Nisaveh, that God desired to have a home in the lowest of worlds. The Alter Rebbe explains this in chapter 36. So this questioner is asking, is God's desire, nisaveh, to have a home in the lowest of worlds rooted in Atzmus or in giluiim? Okay, Atzmus in the core essence, I described earlier, that's beyond all structures and all definitions. So that's the questioner asks. The first mimer of Tafrei Samach Vov, when it says nisaveh, is nisaveh hinting to Atzmus? Or is it a giluiim of Hashem, not Atzmus? The taiva of Hashem, Kavyachal, God's desire, in reference to the creation of the world, is hinting where is revelation, gili, or is it about himself, the etzem? And the Maimon Leitiyah Mishakel Tavshin Yud Beis, the one that Rebbe said, is that talking about giluiim and Atzmus? Okay. So first let me refer you to episodes 171 and 231 where I spoke about this more at length, what this nisaveh is and so on. Generally speaking, in the Maimonim it says nisaveh b'atzmus yizbaruch. It's the only thing that associates atzmus yizbaruch. And that's why it's called a taiva. Now, obviously, we can't use the word taiva and God, definitely not an Atzmus. But it's what's called l'shachich ha'ezen. In order for us to be able to say anything, we need to have a word. So in Shabbos Pasha Vayeshev Tovshin Lamed Zayin, the Rebbe has a beautiful sikh, a very deep sikh. I should discuss it one of these weeks. That tainug is the highest level. Nisaveh kodesh baruch hu, is higher than rotzen, than desire, will. Nisaveh is used, as the Alter Rebbe said, Vala Teves nishtokin kasha. So it's an example used for us to understand something that's not driven by logic. When someone has a desire for something, someone has pleasure for something, desire here, as in rotzen, as in tainug, as taiva, you don't ask why. It's who you are, and you just have a desire. The point here, we're not talking about a taiva that is irrational. We're talking about that transcends logic. And the same thing here, nisaveh kodesh baruch hu, when you say, why did God create the world? So we have the different reasons as he enumerates in Samach Vav and Tavshin Beis, the Rebbe Sichos Shemos Beis and Chelik Vav, Kutei Sichos. So there's the reason to reveal his Gala Shlemus Kechesov, his full potential, to reveal the potential, the complete, the actualize his potential. There's Begin Dishtamuden Be, in order that we should know him. There's Yakiru Gedolose, to recognize his greatness, which is similar. So there Chassidus explains, and the Rebbe explains that that's in Eris and in Kalim and in Eris. But then the ultimate reason, Taim Amiti, because all those reasons are not enough to explain. It's enough to explain in Sheidish Talshus these reasons. But what's the ultimate reason? Why would God do it? The answer is there is no why. Because logic and why is created by God. The question is, why did he create a existence? You don't ask why, you say nisaveh. So it's the closest thing that we can define Atzmus, that Atzmus desires this. And there's no reason why, because you can't ask a question why before there's logic. And you can't ask why in Atzmus. In giluiim, you could ask why, because a gili does not have to be. So you could ask, why is it there? The answer is God wants it there, because it's going to serve a function. But Atzmus does not serve a function. He's not a functionary. He doesn't have defined by function. So then the question is, like Chassidus says, Lama nisaveh, we don't know, because it's beyond logic. It transcends. It's a etzem wanting something. You can't even say the word want, so we say nisaveh, for lack of a better expression. And then we negate and say, do all the negating and saying it's not desire, it's not taiva, it's just that we don't have another word. So what else are we going to say? We have to say the Eibishter created a world. And he has a kavanah in it. What is it? So nisaveh is the closest thing to describe something that's higher than understanding and logic and ratzon and any type of tziyur. So it's absolutely an Atzmus, not in giluiim. If it was in giluiim, you wouldn't need to rely on nisaveh. You can rely on a reason, or one of the reasons, or other reasons, and so on. So Chassidus says, Lama nisaveh, we don't know why. We know what. We know what he wants, but we don't know why he wants. And the reason is because the why doesn't even exist yet. That's the general explanation of this. Okay. Let's go now to the essays, 3 essays. As we wind down this year, that's the 2018 essay contest. So the first essay, You Are a Gift. Gitel, Chana 11, age 62, New Haven, Connecticut. Griffin Hospital psychiatrist. Okay. Everything I need to know about Chassidus I learned from a person who couldn't speak. Very moving essay. Years ago when I was in college, I volunteered one summer in a VA hospital's physical therapy department. There was a young man there who had been in a coma for over a year as a result of a motorcycle accident. One day he miraculously woke up. I don't want to take away from the surprise, the drama of this, so you'll read it on your own. But she says, I learned how what we are is God's gift to us. What we become is our gift to God, quoting Eleanor Powell. It goes on to explain the Chassidus of it. God is good, the concept of Gitel. We are put on this earth to make a dwelling place for God. Tikkun olam, do not judge your fellow. We cannot judge others, we must judge ourselves. Very short but powerful essay. This essay has just been posted. The essays that I read and review are posted each week at meaningfullife.com/mylife. You can also receive them if you subscribe, free subscription to our weekly newsletter, and we put links there for each of the new essays. Well done essay, really well done. I want to say one comment because someone mentioned it to me and I also noticed it. The essays are not being read in the order that they were marked. For whatever reason, technical reasons, I'm reading them in the order that I was given, but the truth is they should have been read in the order of the highest marks downward. So just be aware of that. So many essays that I may be reading later received much, much higher marks than essays I read earlier. And I just wanted to clarify that. We will try to correct that in the future. The next essay is in Hebrew. The next 2 essays, actually. Live Every Moment Anew. By Yosef Yizchak Shlome Pevzner, age 20, Beitar Illit, Yerushalayim, a student in Migdal Emek. So this is Tainug Ischachos Lichius Kol Rega Mechadosh. So this, of course, is the central theme about what is real and what is not real, and the central theme of Chassidus, of Ischachus, of constant renewal. That when you connect, so to speak, to the power station, to the central nervous system, you're able to go back and renew and experience renewal all the time. So he does this in an elaborate way, explaining seichel and cognitive emotions, and how keiches, faculties, go back to their source for regeneration, for recharging their battery, so to speak. Explains it very nicely, starting from Einig being the source. I mentioned Taiva, Einig is being the highest koyach atik in language of Chassidus and Kabbalah, and how that translates into Amunah, and ultimately giving us the ability to constantly grow, constantly thirsty and grow and aspire to greater and higher heights. Feeling renewal all the time. Imagine feeling renewal all the time. Okay, that's essay number 2 for today. And the next essay is, the third essay is Regaining Control Over Your Life by Menachem Mendel Chamu, Ches Mem Vav, age 25, Tzfat, Israel. He's a he teaches soldiers in the army, in the IDF. His is regaining control over your life. So there he talks a lot about how we lose control in modern technological world because of all the different distractions and technologies, and how one can contend with that and find a way to regaining control. And he does that by explaining what is a human being and how we have to be able to be deliberate in our choices. Deliberate in our choices of things that you know you can refrain from doing, things you're not capable of doing, and then knowing that you really have the power to control and have control in your own personal life. Of course, he uses a lot based on Moyach Shal Ta'alev, self-control from Tanya, Perikut Beis, and from other sources of Chassidus. So another good essay in Hebrew. And as I said at the outset of this episode, that we are about to launch formally the new My Life Chassidus Applied Essay Contest. But I've given you an inside scoop, so you can begin working on it, knowing that this is happening, and it will be, the deadline, as I said, is Zayin Ad edition, at the Tovshin Tes, the February 12th, I believe I said. Yes, February 12th, correct. Now, let me conclude. I wish I have a very healthy week, a very blessed week, as we go into Parshas Shemos this month, the Sefer HaGeula, and we should already be zeicher to the Geula Mitzvah Shlome that comes through Yefutzu Meinasecha Chutza, and Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, through spreading your wellsprings outward. It's an honor always to be here with you. Please share your questions, your comments, your feedback, and of course we always look forward to your support on all levels, including financial support, especially as we come to the end of the secular year. Thank you. We're here 8 to 9 p.m. every Sunday, as we'll be here next week on My Life Chassidus Applied. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 241. Be well.